Hello and welcome back to my channel. Well, you've seen the title of the video. You clicked on it, you know what this is going to be about. Yes, I will be doing HRCYED 3.0. Now, everyone who I've ever interacted with on the bookish internet, I expect will be rather surprised, because I've been quite adamant before in not wanting to do HRCYED. In a, I love this for you, but don't at me kind of way. But yet, here we are. So I'll quickly explain what HRCYED is for those who don't know, and also why I didn't want to do it before and why I changed my mind this year. So HRCYED is an acronym. It stands for the hardest reading challenge you'll ever do. It is a year-long reading challenge created by Stephanie on the channel QWERTY. It looks like a 5x5 square bingo board, and each square on the bingo board is not just one reading prompt, it's an entire challenge on itself. So altogether there are 25 smaller reading challenges which together make up HRCYED. If this doesn't make any sense, I'll link the official announcement video down below, but I think it'll start making more sense along the way, I'm sure. So yeah, the reason I didn't want to do it before is, well basically because it's really hard. I think someone worked out that for the latest version that I'm about to do this year, you will have to read 150 books to complete it, and that's a lot of books. I could possibly read 150 books in a year, but it would be a real stretch, and every book I read would have to work for the challenge somehow, and it wouldn't leave any room to read anything else, and I would feel really trapped in the challenge. And this is also something I've seen other people struggling with, especially when it comes to the last months of the challenge. There's no room anymore to pick anything by whim, just mood read anything. Everything has to be on the challenge, because otherwise you'll run out of time to complete it. Now, you are allowed to use one book for two different prompts, so you can double up. So technically you can do the challenge with reading half the amount of books, but that does require a lot of thought and planning, and I've noticed for myself, and I know some people actually love the planning part, that's like their favorite part of the challenge, is that I notice that when I plan out things, the more time I spend thinking about it, the more I feel like the task is already done, and then I still need to read the book, but I'm already kind of over it in my head, if that makes sense. So yeah, those are basically the biggest reasons why I didn't feel like HRCYED was for me. But obviously, I'm here telling you that I am gonna do HRCYED. So what has changed? The way I'm gonna do it, that will make it work for me, is that I'm gonna do HRCYED, but I'm not gonna finish it. What? Like, the moment I realized, like in my own head, there's no HRCYED please. The moment I realized in my own head that that's also an option, it's a challenge, and the thing about challenges is that you can fail them, you can not complete them, then suddenly this is just a bingo board with super original and creative prompts. And so my idea is to, whenever I feel like it, probably about once a month, maybe a little more, a little bit less, I'll put the different bingo squares on a spinner wheel, and then I'll spin the wheel and pick one and complete that particular challenge. And I think this way I won't get overwhelmed by the whole thing, because I'm just focusing on one square at a time, and I won't get bored halfway through because I'm not planning everything out. And then at the end of the year, we'll have a look at what I've managed to read, and I will have had fun along the way. Like, honestly, I've seen so many people working so hard to finish the challenge that it never even crossed my mind that I could join in without having to complete it. And it has honestly changed my mind. So yeah, that's the plan for the coming year. In a minute I'll spin the wheel to decide what my first square is going to be. I've not put all the different squares on the wheel right now because some I'm less excited to do, or at least right now. There is actually no squares that I'm really dreading in this challenge, but some just require a little bit more thinking or planning, and I wanted to start with one that I could start reading for straight away. I don't know when this video will come out, but it's the 1st of July today, and I'll be starting on the official start date, which I think is the 7th. I just wanted to get this video going because I'm just excited to see what I will start with. Okay, so let me pull up the spinning wheel that I made on my phone. There we are. I got the rainbow one. Okay, let's get the ads out of the way. There we go, let's spin. What will we get? Food pyramid. Okay, so I think this is a prompt where you have to find different food items on the cover of books, maybe also the title, I'm not entirely sure. Definitely on the cover of the books, and they have to be in the different food groups on in the food pyramid. So you can't have like 5 different fruits. So yeah, that's my first challenge. I believe it's 5 different ones, and I think I'll just start reading and I'll come back when I've read some. So I finished my first book. It has nothing to do with food though. I thought I would have finished this book before her class started, but I actually didn't start reading it until the 7th. So we're already going rogue. This is The Wedding by Dorothy West. I'll give you my thoughts on the book first, and then I'll let you know towards prompts I'm putting this. First of all, I think the publishing history of this book is pretty fascinating. The author was born in, I think it was 1907, and she was kind of in the same writing circles as some of the famous Harlem Renaissance writers like Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes. Although she only finished her first book, or published her first book in 1948, and then her second and last book, which is this book, didn't get published until 1995, so almost like 50 years later, when she's like well in her 80s. So I found that very interesting. I should probably say that I've been in a bit of a weird reading slump, in that it wasn't that I didn't want to read, but every book I've read since, I don't know, 4 or 5 months have felt like a 3-star read for me, just kind of average. And I've been struggling to gather my thoughts on books just because it feels like nothing's really standing out, either in a good way or a bad way. So I'm finding it hard to differentiate. And that's kind of been going on long enough that I feel like the problem is with me and not just, you know, a bad patch of books one after another. And yeah, it's been kind of annoying me, also kind of why I haven't been on BookTube for a while, but I'm thinking maybe just pushing through and talking about books even though I don't have much to say will help me get over it. I don't know. Right, back to the book. This one did not break the 3-ish star break, although I have to say there was something about the writing style that did spark a little something in my brain that gave me a little hope that words can still excite me. So this book is set in the 1950s in a middle-class community in Martha's Vineyard, and people are gathered for a wedding, the wedding of Shelby. She's about to marry a white musician. I have to say, the community that we're talking about and Shelby, they're all black people. Not everyone in her family is really enamored with this match. One, because he's not black, and also he's not a doctor. And then we sort of jump to different previous generations in the past, going back I think almost like 5 generations, and it almost reads like an interconnected short story collection, which is actually a style I usually really love. And I think if I'd known it beforehand and not like figured it out when I was already 3/4 of the way through, I would have enjoyed this a lot more, because now I just felt confused a lot of the time. You see through these generations how relationships developed and got broken off, the different kinds of broken and blended families the characters in this book grew up in. It talks about social climbing and mixing of different ethnicities and socio-economic backgrounds. There's a lot of discussion on passing and what it means when your skin color is not the same as the other people in your family. And just the way that different patterns of relationships and interactions came back through the generations again and again. Like I said, I really liked the writing style. I really thought the author did a great job at writing all these different characters, who were most of them quite unlikable. They all make stupid decisions. There's no sort of sugarcoating on how mean and how petty they can be, but that also made them really captivating. I'm gonna keep this book around, and I might read it again in the future when this weird reading spell is over, because I do think I could actually enjoy it a lot more than I did now, because it has a lot of elements in it that I know I like. So yeah, that was my first book. Now where's this book going? I am putting it in the title is the exact same as another for one of the not so secret prompts. There's loads of books with a word dwelling in the title, and in the 10-second stroll I did on the Storygraph, I already saw 3 books called The Wedding exactly. And then for now I'm also putting this in the 2-word title in titular counting. So yeah, we're off. I promise the next book will have food on the cover. Okay, time for another update, because I've finished 3 more books. First of all, I've read The Berry Pickers by Amanda Peters, which obviously goes in the fruit category of the food pyramid. So this book follows 2 narratives. First we've got Joe, who's a 50-something-year-old Canadian man. He's from Mi'kmaq descent. I'm very sorry if I pronounced that wrong. He's an indigenous man, and he's reflecting back on his life. When he was a young boy, his family would always go down from Nova Scotia to Maine during the summer months to go berry picking, and on one of these trips his youngest sister Ruthie just kind of vanishes without a trace. And Joe is the last person who sees her. And then the other perspective is from Norma. She's a young girl growing up in a quite well-to-do family in Maine, and she keeps on having recurring dreams about a family that seem very familiar, and those dreams almost feel more like memories than dreams or something she imagines. Her parents kind of brush it off as a very vivid imagination, but at the same time her mother is very protective of her, and Norma often feels like her parents are keeping something from her. Now it's very clear, at least to me it was very clear from the beginning, that the Norma from this perspective is Ruthie, the younger girl that went missing from the other perspective. I've been really looking forward to reading this book because it starts off really promising. It's about this indigenous girl who's basically gets kidnapped by a woman who is desperate to have a child of her own. I think this book could have had some really interesting discussions on things like what it's like to be longing for a child so bad that you are willing to take someone else's child, but also you know, the systemic racism that is part of this. You know, she chose to kidnap an indigenous child because in some way in her mind that was less wrong to do. So, you know, what's all that about? It's about growing up feeling like an outsider. It could be about grieving for someone when you haven't had the chance to say goodbye, and always having that hope that that person is still around. So I felt like it had a lot of potential, but it just really felt flat for me. It really read like something I've read before, even though I've never read a book with the same or even a similar plot. Just the way the plot unfolded, how the characters were portrayed, it really gave me nothing new. And it felt to me like someone went to like a writing camp and they had just learned a few new techniques and they wanted to implement them in their book straight away. And some of it worked well and some of it not so much. But all throughout the book I felt like I could tell when something was a literary device, you know, something you learn in writing school that the author was using to either move the plot forward a certain way or make me feel a certain way. And I couldn't appreciate that. I can see if you are just getting into literary fiction, this could be like a good entry book, but I think I've read enough of it by now that when I pick it up I want something a little extra. I want, you know, something original. I want something different and not something that just reads like an elaborate writing exercise. I'm probably being a little bit too harsh now because this book definitely wasn't all bad. I mean, I finished it, so I thought it was worth reading the whole way through. But I'm at a point where I'm really tired of middle of the road, just fine books. So yeah, that was The Berry Pickers by Amanda Peters. Next I also read a book called Cold Toast by Kathryn Aldridge-Morris. It has the word toast in the title, but the title doesn't count, but it also has a box of cornflakes. So it falls under the grains in the food pyramid. This is a very little slip of a book. It's a collection of short stories or like very short form flash fiction. They're all ranging from like a paragraph to 2 pages maximum. And I really enjoyed this whilst reading it. I thought the stories were very well crafted. I was really impressed with what the author managed to do in such a short time. Like the stories felt very, very complete. I would say a theme throughout the book is women and girls' defiance against men and patriarchy. You know, sometimes very obvious, sometimes more in a quiet, understated way, but they're all like pretty punchy stories. Having said that, I've read this a week ago and I could not tell you what a single one of these stories is about. I think because you just spent such a short time with each story and with each character, it has just very little staying power. Again, it was fine, but at least I feel like this is kind of I enjoyed it for what it was, kind of 3 stars, instead of you know, I was expecting more of it 3 stars, which in my opinion is worse. So yeah, that was Cold Toast, and I'm putting both of these as cover styles for my like second prompt. This being, I don't know, close-up painting, and this is more of a pop art style. So yeah, that's 2 more food books, and the last book I want to mention for now is Stay for a Spell by Amy Coombe, which doesn't have food on the cover, I don't think at least, but it was the July book for the Shelf This Book Club, and this I think is a cozy fantasy romance. I'm not sure how genres work. If you've been here for a while, you know that's not something I really gravitate towards usually, and after reading this I'm not convinced of it being in my type of genre. Anyway, in this we have Princess Tanadel, and she lives in the kingdom of, I think it was Widemar, and she loves books and reading. So one day she's out on one of her royal visits in the country. She has a minute's despair and she walks into a local bookshop, and there she gets cursed. And her curse is to be locked up in that bookshop until she unlocks her heart's desire. She's not too mad about it because, you know, she spends the entire day in a bookstore instead of cutting ribbons. So she can entertain herself. But her parents, the king and the queen, they are not so happy about this, and they send all the princes in the neighboring countries to Tanadel to see if anyone can break the curse by kissing her. Then we also have a handsome pirate somewhere in the mix. What I enjoyed about it is that it kind of read like a typical fairy tale with the princess and the breaking of the curse. I like the little hints of magic. I like that all the princes were all a bit silly. I love the side character of Sasha, who is a teenage goth dragon girl who works as a shop assistant. I had some fun bits, but I think the romance part of this book made me really uncomfortable, and I think that's because of how the story is set up and how the characters are portrayed, and the overall tone of the book. It, to me, reads very much like a middle grade book. The main character is set to be 21 or 22, I think, but she reads much younger. I think it's part of her having lived a very sheltered life, and she mentions somewhere in the book that she's never kissed someone before. Maybe it was also the narrator's voice in the audiobook I listened to. Maybe it's just what cozy fantasy is like in general, and I'm just not used to it. But it read very young, and so when it came to the romance part of the book, and things started heating up a little bit, and it's very tame, but still, you know, there is like some kissing and some stuff going on. It felt really icky, because to me Tanadel read like a teenager just had a crush on a much older person, and to me that older person who is not actually older but reads older should have recognized that and stopped it. I don't know, it just felt to me really uncomfortable to read it. Yeah, I had an issue with that, but even I think if you take the whole romance out of the equation, I don't feel like it was very well written. It had a lot of cliches, a lot of repetitive phrases. I mean, you could make a bingo card for phrases that Tanadel says when she's with her crush. The amount of times he makes her shiver, tremble, flush, fluster, flutter, blush. You know, they're going to be endless. Or, you know, have a drink anytime tight breeches are mentioned. So yeah, I don't know how this compares to other cozy fantasies or like cozy fantasy romance books, but I'm not convinced of the genre yet. But I had a good time speculating in the Discord chat, so that's that. Yeah, I'm putting this in the secret prompts for a book with a pun in the title, and in the second chances hidden gem square as a book that's kind of out of my comfort zone and not something I wouldn't usually pick up. I've read some more books. First I read The Theory of Flight by Siphiwe Gloria Ndlovu. She's a Zimbabwean author, and this book centers a woman, Imogen, or Jeannie as people call her, and she's on her deathbed after a long illness, and all her family and friends are all coming from all over the world to say their last goodbyes, including people she hasn't spoken to in decades. That's kind of the start of the book, and it then goes back in time to her parents and her grandparents and other family members, because this is one of those big sweeping family sagas, and I feel like that's both its strength and its downfall. It's a book that reminds me of books like 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez or The House of Spirits by Isabel Allende, in that we follow a family through several generations. There's a strong sense of place, there's a big family house at the center of the story. It's sort of firmly set in the time and place, in this case Zimbabwe, and the political landscape at the time, how that develops and plays a role in the story. I actually saw a short clip of the author saying that she wanted to capture being Zimbabwean in her writing. I don't think that clip specifically was about this book, but I do think it still applies. She mentions that Zimbabwe has had three or four different names in the last 100 years. So the country has been trying to find its own identity through being colonized and then being independent and having sort of different types of leadership. Another big element of this book is the HIV crisis and how that shaped the country. There's also a hint of magical realism in the book, which is also why it kind of reminded me of Isabel Allende's kind of style of writing. Jeannie, our main kind of character, is said to be born from a golden egg, and how that has made her lucky. And just overall, I really liked how ambitious this novel was and like how big a story the author wanted to tell. But on the other hand, like I said, I think that was also the downfall of this book. Maybe she bit off a bit more than she could chew. It took me a long time to get into the story because I found it hard to remember all the characters. It actually had like a cast of characters in the beginning of the book, but because I was reading a digital copy, it was like harder to like refer back to that. And I also think the sort of whole magical realism aspect of the book didn't really add to the story for me, and I think could have been left out. Yeah, just overall, it really took a long time for me to get into the book. Like, it was only sort of towards 3/4 of the book that I was like, okay, now I'm starting to know these people. I start to see what the author wants to achieve, and I'm like starting to settle into the story. But yeah, I feel like 3/4, that's too late. So yeah, I absolutely applaud this book for being ambitious, and I would love to read more by this author. I think ultimately striving for something big and not quite getting there is better than playing it safe. Yeah, that was The Theory of Light. I'm putting this in a food pyramid because it has an egg on the cover, so that's a protein, I think. I mean, you can sort of argue, it's a golden egg, is it edible? But I see an egg as an egg, so it counts. And then I'm also putting it in Traipsing in the Regions, which because it's a book from Southern Africa. And then I also read Mega Milk by Megan Milks, and this is a collection of essays. I think because of their last name they were inspired to dive deep into the topic of milk and the wide range of connotation this has with vastly different things. They go into the dairy industry, into capitalism, they go into milk as sort of the symbol of the white conservative nuclear family, they go into parenthood, breastfeeding. It's kind of hard to summarize because, again, I would say this book is ambitious, and sometimes I could follow their train of thought, and sometimes they completely lost me. I'd say they definitely succeed in, demonstrating that milk is not an ordinary substance, not just a food or a bodily fluid, but a substance that has cultural meaning, political meaning, economic meaning, and I just find it really fascinating. And also a little disturbing, because honestly they get a little freaky in this book. It's a little weird. So yeah, this will go into the dairy part of the food pyramid, and I'm also going to put this in cover styles as well for an illustrated cover. And then the final book I'm going to talk about in this video is actually one I really liked. So thank goodness the 3-star curse is broken, and that is Life Among the Savages by Shirley Jackson. I had high hopes for this one because We Have Always Lived in the Castle is one of my favorite books of all time, and this didn't let me down. I'm putting this in the backlist authors square, which is to read backlist books by your favorite authors, and of course the food pyramid. You have to kind of get a magnifying glass out for this, but if you look very closely you can see there's like a picnic going on there, and I think it has like a birthday cake and a bowl of punch, possibly a watermelon. So I'm putting this in the party food section of the food pyramid. I don't know if that is such a thing as an actual party food section, but I feel like it's a category on its own. This is a non-fiction book, like a memoir kind of book, where Shirley Jackson chronicles her life as a young mother and writer. At the start of the book she has 2 young children, and they are just moving into a new house in Vermont, and she just shares stories of her life in a very anecdotal slice of life kind of way. There isn't much of a narrative structure in this, you know, isn't a memoir where you see like the progression of a person's life, but it's more, you know, you sort of witness time passing in this. And I feel like she's just such a good observer of life, you know, finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. She'll describe very mundane, regular things happening in her life. Things that, even though this book was published over 70 years ago, they still feel timeless. And the way she puts them on the page, you know, just is so funny and sharp and witty. For example, she describes a moment when her children and their friends want to put on a made-up play for her. So they tell her like to sit on the sofa, and she describes how everything unfolds around her. You know, her kids are whispering in the hallway before they come in. You know, the story of the play changes about 3 times. One kid doesn't want to play anymore halfway through. The other one just wants to play dead. The cat's involved as well, and meanwhile she's thinking about what to make for dinner and about a coat that needs a button sewed on. Obviously, me retelling that story is not funny in any way, but you know, you just have to trust me, this book will have you grinning. Her writing style is very easy, very effortless, and yeah, I loved reading about her everyday life. Just, you know, a regular family going about their lives, and I think because she observes the day-to-day, it becomes recognizable to readers today, and it has this timeless quality. Of course, there's certain things that we do differently nowadays, you know, if only for the amount of cigarettes she smokes. She has 2 babies during the course of this book, and in both cases she has just said to her husband in the morning, I think my labor has started, and the husband will say, all right, honey, ask me to drive you to the hospital, and I'm off to work now, goodbye. So obviously times have changed in some regards, but in others it hasn't, and it probably won't. You know, living in a house with different people, most of them children, will create absurd situations. And, you know, Shirley Jackson obviously loves her family as a mother. The writer in her can take a helicopter view and observe it and sort of see the absurdity of it all. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I'm very glad I did. And now, of course, I want to read everything Shirley Jackson has ever written. So yeah, that is it for this video. I think I had a pretty decent start for her yet. We finished 1 square. I've got some plans for next month, what I want to do, but you'll just have to wait and see. Okay, thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.